My name is Charlotte Young. I'm 38 years old, and this is the story of how my family ignored me for years. Then a millionaire businesswoman gave me a $250,000 opportunity that changed everything. For decades, I was the invisible helper in my own family, the person everyone called when they needed something, but never thought to check on when I was struggling. I cleaned up messes, babysat kids, lent money I never got back, and listened to everyone's problems while mine were dismissed as unimportant. But one rainy Tuesday afternoon in a coffee shop, everything shifted when a woman in a designer blazer sat across from me and said something that made my heart stop. "I've been watching you, and I see potential that nobody else does." If you've ever felt invisible in your own life, make sure to hit that subscribe button and give this video a like, because what happened next might just inspire you to take back your power too. Have you ever been overlooked by the people who should love you most? Drop a comment and let me know, because you're not alone in this. The look in her eyes wasn't pity. It was recognition, like she saw something in me that I'd forgotten existed. My hands were shaking as I held my cheap coffee cup, wondering if this was some kind of scam or if the universe had finally decided to throw me a lifeline. She introduced herself as Victoria Hartwell, CEO of Hartwell Industries, a woman who'd built a multi-million-dollar consulting empire from scratch. "I don't do handouts," she said firmly, sliding a business card across the table. "But I do invest in people who've been underestimated their whole lives, because those are the ones who fight the hardest when given a real chance." I sat there frozen, trying to process what was happening while my phone buzzed with yet another text from my sister asking me to pick up her kids from school. For years, I'd been programmed to say yes to everyone else and no to myself, trained like a circus animal to perform on command without expecting applause. But something in Victoria's words cracked open a door I'd kept locked for so long I'd forgotten it was there. She wasn't offering charity. She was offering a chance to prove that I was more than the family doormat, more than the forgotten middle child who existed only to serve others. And as I looked into her confident eyes, I realized this moment would either break me completely or rebuild me into someone I'd only dreamed of becoming. Let me take you back to where this all started, because you need to understand just how invisible I'd become in my own family. I grew up as the middle child in the Young family. My older brother Marcus was the golden boy who could do no wrong, and my younger sister Amanda was the baby everyone adored and protected. I was just there, the reliable one who didn't cause problems and always helped out without being asked. My parents, Linda and Robert Young, were good people on the surface, but they had this unspoken expectation that I would always be available, always understanding, always willing to sacrifice my needs for the family's convenience. If you've ever felt like a supporting character in your own life story, go ahead and hit that like button right now, and subscribe if you want to hear how I finally stepped into the starring role. What role did you play in your family growing up? The helper, the rebel, or the favorite? I'd love to hear your story in the comments. The pattern started young and only got worse as I grew older into adulthood. When I was 16, I worked part-time at a grocery store to save for college while Marcus got a brand new car for his birthday, because boys need reliable transportation. When I was 23 and finally scraped together enough money for a down payment on a small apartment, my parents asked me to lend Amanda $8,000 for her wedding instead, promising they'd pay me back within 6 months. That was 15 years ago, and I'm still waiting for that money. Every holiday, every birthday, every family crisis, I was the one who showed up, cleaned up, and shut up about my own feelings, because that's just what family does. By the time I hit my mid-30s, I'd become a ghost in my own life, going through the motions without any real purpose or joy. I had a decent job as an administrative assistant at a law firm, but I'd turned down 3 promotions because they would have required me to relocate or work longer hours, and my family needed me to be available. My apartment was small and outdated because every time I saved money, someone needed it more. Marcus's business loan, Amanda's medical bills, my parents' roof repair. I'd wake up exhausted every morning, spend my day making other people's lives easier, and fall asleep wondering if anyone would even notice if I disappeared. The loneliness wasn't about being alone. It was about being surrounded by people who only saw you as a tool, not a person. And the worst part? I'd convinced myself that this was love. that sacrifice without recognition was somehow noble, when really it was just slow suicide of the soul. Let me paint you a picture of what my life actually looked like before Victoria Hartwell walked into it, because the details matter when you're trying to understand how low I'd sunk. Every Sunday, without fail, I'd drive 40 minutes to my parents' house for family dinner, and every single time I'd spend 3 hours cooking, serving, and cleaning, while everyone else sat around laughing and talking like I was hired help. Marcus would show up late with his wife Jennifer and their 2 kids, complaining about his struggling tech startup while eating the food I'd prepared, never once offering to help, or even saying thank you. Amanda would spend the entire meal on her phone, occasionally asking me to refill her wine glass or cut up food for her 5-year-old daughter Emma, because she was too stressed from her part-time job at a boutique. If this sounds painfully familiar, smash that subscribe button and hit the like, because I'm about to show you how I broke free from this cycle, and trust me, you'll want to see how this unfolds. When was the last time you felt truly appreciated by your family? Drop a comment, because your story matters just as much as mine. The weekdays were even worse because the demands never stopped. They just came through text messages and phone calls instead of face-to-face. Tuesday morning, my mom would text asking me to pick up groceries for her because my dad's back was hurting and she didn't have time. Thursday afternoon, Marcus would call asking if I could loan him another $2,000 to cover payroll because his investors were late with funding. Saturday evening, Amanda would show up at my apartment unannounced with Emma, saying she needed a break and could I watch her daughter overnight while she went out with friends. I'd say yes every single time, canceling my own plans, pushing aside my own needs, telling myself that this was what family was supposed to do for each other. But it was never reciprocal. When I'd asked Marcus to help me move furniture last year, he was too busy, and when I'd asked Amanda to drive me home after a minor surgery, she'd forgotten, and I'd taken an Uber. The breaking point came 3 weeks before I met Victoria, though I didn't recognize it as a breaking point at the time. My company had offered me a promotion to office manager with a $15,000 raise and the opportunity to lead a team of 5 people. It was everything I'd quietly dreamed about, but never believed I deserved. I was sitting at my parents' dinner table, about to share the exciting news, when my mom interrupted me mid-sentence to ask if I could co-sign a loan for Marcus's business because his credit wasn't good enough. The whole table went silent, everyone looking at me expectantly. Like, of course I would say yes. Like my financial future was less important than my brother's 5th failed business venture. I opened my mouth to tell them about my promotion, about how this could finally be my chance to build something for myself, but the words died in my throat when I saw their faces. They weren't interested in my success. They were interested in my usefulness. So I swallowed my news, smiled, and said I'd think about the loan, then went home and cried in my bathtub until the water went cold. That night, I realized I wasn't just invisible. I was erased, and I'd been holding the eraser myself for 38 years. The emptiness inside me wasn't the kind that comes from being alone. It was the kind that comes from being used up, like a battery drained to nothing and then thrown in a drawer until someone needs it again. I'd spent so many years defining myself by what I could do for others that I'd completely lost track of who I was underneath all those roles and responsibilities. When I looked in the mirror, I didn't see Charlotte Young, the person. I saw Charlotte Young, the helper, the fixer, the eternal yes woman who existed solely to make everyone else's life easier. My self-esteem had eroded so slowly that I hadn't noticed it disappearing, like a beach losing sand 1 grain at a time, until suddenly there's nothing left but rocks and emptiness. If you've ever felt like you've lost yourself while taking care of everyone else, please hit that subscribe button and give this video a like, because what I'm about to share might be the wake-up call you need too. Have you ever looked in the mirror and not recognized the person staring back? Let me know in the comments, because that moment of recognition is where change begins. The worst part wasn't the lack of appreciation. It was the fact that I'd taught them to treat me this way by never setting boundaries or demanding respect. Every time I'd said yes when I meant no, every time I'd smiled through the pain of being overlooked, every time I'd made myself smaller to make them more comfortable, I'd been training them to see me as less than human. I'd become a doormat with a heartbeat, and I'd laid myself down in front of their feet willingly, because some twisted part of me believed that suffering in silence was the same as being loved. My therapist, Dr. Sarah Mitchell, had been telling me this for 2 years, but I'd always defended my family, always made excuses, always insisted that they didn't mean to hurt me. But the truth I was finally starting to face was brutal. They did know they were hurting me. They just didn't care enough to stop because my pain was more convenient than their discomfort. The emotional void had physical symptoms too. I was exhausted all the time despite sleeping 8 hours a night. My stomach was constantly in knots, and I'd developed stress-related eczema on my hands from constantly wringing them with worry. I'd stopped having hobbies years ago because who had time for painting or hiking or book clubs when your family needed you every single day? I'd stopped dating because the 2 relationships I'd tried to build had fallen apart when my boyfriends realized they'd always come second to my family's demands. I was 38 years old, living like a servant in my own life, watching everyone around me grow and thrive while I stayed frozen in place, waiting for permission to want something for myself. And the scariest realization of all was this: if I died tomorrow, my family wouldn't mourn Charlotte the person. They'd mourn Charlotte the convenience, wondering who would pick up the slack now that their free labor was gone. That thought haunted me every night as I stared at my ceiling in the dark, wondering if this was all there was. If I'd waste my entire life waiting for crumbs of affection from people who saw me as a tool instead of a human being. But I had no idea that in just 3 days, a chance encounter would crack open the prison I'd built around myself. That rainy Tuesday started like any other disappointing day. I'd just left my boss's office after declining the promotion because Marcus needed me to co-sign that loan, and I was too afraid to rock the boat at work while taking on more financial risk. I felt numb as I walked to the coffee shop across from my office, ordering my usual cheap drip coffee because I couldn't justify spending extra on a latte when my family needed money. The place was crowded, and I grabbed the last empty table by the window, sitting down with my coffee and staring at the rain, wondering if this hollow feeling would ever go away. That's when she appeared, a woman in her mid-50s wearing an elegant navy blazer and carrying herself with the kind of confidence I'd only seen in movies, asking if she could share my table since everywhere else was full. I nodded silently, assuming she'd sit down, check her phone, and ignore me like everyone else did. But instead, she looked directly at me with these piercing green eyes and said something that stopped my heart. "You look like someone who's been carrying the world on her shoulders for far too long." I must have looked shocked because she smiled gently and extended her hand across the table, introducing herself as Victoria Hartwell and explaining that she'd been sitting 2 tables behind me for the past 20 minutes, watching me stare out the window with the saddest expression she'd seen in years. Normally, I would have been embarrassed or defensive, but something about her directness cut through all my usual protective walls. She told me she was the CEO of Hartwell Industries, a consulting firm that specialized in helping undervalued companies restructure and reach their potential, and that she'd built her empire from nothing after leaving an abusive marriage at 40 with only $3,000 to her name. "I make it my business to spot wasted potential," she said, stirring her espresso slowly. "And honey, you are radiating it like a beacon." My hands started shaking so badly I had to put down my coffee cup, and I felt tears threatening to spill over because nobody, absolutely nobody, had ever looked at me and seen potential instead of usefulness. Victoria didn't waste time with small talk or pity. She got straight to business in a way that felt both terrifying and exhilarating. She told me she was launching a new division of her company focused on operational management, and she needed someone to build it from the ground up, someone who understood systems and logistics, and how to keep complicated moving parts working smoothly. "I've been interviewing candidates for 3 months, and they're all technically qualified but emotionally dead inside," she said bluntly. "You, on the other hand, have something rare. You know how to hold things together under pressure, even when nobody appreciates it. And that's the kind of resilience I can't teach." Then she said the words that would change my life forever. "I'm prepared to invest $250,000 in training, resources, and salary for the right person to take on this role. And I think that person is you, Charlotte." She somehow already knew my name. She'd asked the barista when I wasn't looking. My mouth went dry, my vision blurred, and I felt like I was floating outside my body, watching this impossible moment happen to someone else. Because things like this didn't happen to people like me, the invisible helpers who existed in the background of everyone else's success stories. But here she was, this powerful millionaire businesswoman, offering me $250,000 opportunity based on nothing but her gut instinct and 20 minutes of observation. And as I sat there trembling, I knew this was the universe giving me one chance to choose myself, one moment to decide if I'd stay in my cage or fly into the terrifying unknown. You'd think I would have jumped at Victoria's offer immediately, screaming yes and thanking the heavens for this miracle. But instead, I felt pure panic flooding my system like ice water in my veins. My first thought wasn't excitement or gratitude. It was guilt, that toxic familiar friend that had controlled my life for decades, whispering that I couldn't possibly accept this because my family needed me. I stammered something incoherent about needing to think about it, about having responsibilities and commitments, and Victoria just sat back in her chair with a knowing smile that told me she'd expected exactly this reaction. "Let me guess," she said calmly. "You're thinking about all the people who depend on you, all the ways you'll let them down if you dare to put yourself first for once in your life." She'd read me like a book I didn't even know I'd written. If you've ever been offered an amazing opportunity but felt too guilty to take it because of family obligations, hit that subscribe button right now and smash that like, because what I'm about to share about overcoming that guilt might save you years of regret. Have you ever turned down something great because you felt like you didn't deserve it? Tell me in the comments, because I want you to know you're not alone in that struggle. The fear wasn't just about disappointing my family. It was about facing the terrifying possibility that I might fail, that I might not be good enough, that everyone was right to overlook me all these years. What if Victoria was wrong about me? What if I took this chance and proved I was exactly as mediocre and forgettable as my family had always treated me? At least in my current life, I knew the rules. I understood my role, and even though it was painful, it was predictable. This opportunity Victoria was offering meant stepping into complete unknown territory, learning new skills, being visible and accountable, risking public failure instead of private suffering. My mind raced with worst-case scenarios. I'd quit my stable job, take Victoria's investment, mess everything up within 6 months, and end up unemployed and humiliated with nowhere to turn, because I'd burned bridges with my family by choosing myself over them. The anxiety was so intense I could barely breathe, and I told Victoria I needed time to think. Maybe a few weeks to sort through everything and make a rational decision. But Victoria didn't give me a few weeks. She gave me 72 hours. And she did it with a wisdom that probably saved my life. "Charlotte, I'm going to be direct with you because I respect you too much to coddle you," she said, leaning forward with intensity burning in her eyes. "If I give you more than 3 days, you'll talk yourself out of this opportunity. You'll consult with people who have a vested interest in keeping you small, and you'll convince yourself that staying miserable is somehow noble." She handed me her business card and a folder containing details about the position, the salary structure, and the training program. "Here's what I know about people like us, the ones who've been underestimated our whole lives. We don't need more time to think. We need permission to want something for ourselves. And I'm giving you that permission right now." She stood up to leave, touching my shoulder gently before walking away, and I sat there alone with my cold coffee and racing heart, holding a folder that contained either my liberation or my destruction. That night, I drove home in silence, not turning on the radio because I needed to hear my own thoughts for once. And I realized the scariest part wasn't the risk of failing. It was the risk of succeeding, of proving that I'd wasted decades of my life accepting crumbs when I could have had the whole feast. The guilt felt like chains wrapped around my chest, squeezing tighter with every breath, because how could I abandon my family? How could I be so selfish? How could I choose my own dreams over their needs? But underneath that guilt was a tiny voice, barely a whisper, asking a question I'd never dared to ask before. What if their needs aren't more important than mine? What if I matter too? What if this is my one shot at a real life? Those 72 hours felt like 72 years as I wrestled with the decision that would define the rest of my life. I did something I'd never done before. I called in sick to work for 2 days and turned off my phone, ignoring the 17 missed calls from my family, because for once, I needed silence to hear my own voice. I sat in my apartment with Victoria's folder spread across my coffee table, reading and rereading the job description, the salary breakdown, the training schedule, and I realized something that shook me to my core. I was qualified for this, maybe even overqualified, because I'd been managing chaos and keeping impossible systems running smoothly for my entire adult life, just never for my own benefit. The skills were there, hiding under layers of self-doubt and family conditioning that had convinced me I was only good for menial support tasks. I started writing in my journal, something Dr. Mitchell had been encouraging me to do for months, and I wrote a question that changed everything. If I loved myself as much as I love my family, what would I choose? The answer came faster than I expected, and it was both liberating and terrifying. I would choose me. I would take the risk. I would bet on my own potential for once in my goddamn life. But choosing myself meant setting boundaries with my family, a concept that felt as foreign to me as speaking Mandarin or climbing Mount Everest. I'd spent decades being boundaryless, absorbing everyone's problems like a sponge, never saying no, never protecting my own energy or resources because I'd been taught that boundaries were selfish. But as I read articles online about healthy family dynamics and codependency, I started understanding that boundaries aren't walls meant to keep people out. They're property lines that define where you end and others begin, protecting both parties from resentment and exploitation. Setting boundaries meant I could still love my family without being destroyed by them, still help when genuinely needed without sacrificing my entire existence at their altar. It meant saying, I can't, instead of, I'll figure it out. Saying, that doesn't work for me, instead of whatever you need. Saying, I matter too, instead of staying silent and invisible. The real breakthrough came on the third morning when I imagined myself at 70 years old, looking back on this moment. And I asked that future version of myself what she wished I'd done. The answer was so clear it made me cry. She wished I'd been brave. She wished I'd taken the chance. She wished I'd stopped waiting for my family's approval to live my own life, because that approval was never coming anyway. I thought about all the times I'd set myself on fire to keep them warm, all the dreams I'd buried to make room for their demands, all the years I'd spent being half alive because being fully alive felt too selfish. And I realized that setting boundaries wasn't about being mean or abandoning anyone. It was about radical self-respect, about finally treating myself with the same care and consideration I'd given everyone else for free. So I made a decision that terrified and thrilled me in equal measure. I would accept Victoria's offer. I would take the job, and I would start saying no to my family's unreasonable demands, not because I stopped loving them, but because I finally started loving myself. That afternoon, I turned my phone back on and called Victoria, my voice shaking but determined, and I said the 3 words that would change my entire life. I'm saying yes. I'd naively hoped my family would be happy for me, maybe even proud, but I should have known better after 38 years of evidence to the contrary. I called a family meeting that Sunday, gathering everyone at my parents' house because I wanted to tell them all at once about my new job and the changes that would be coming. I walked in with my head held high, carrying the confidence Victoria had helped me find, and I announced that I'd accepted a position as Director of Operations at Hartwell Industries with a 6-figure salary, and that I'd be starting an intensive training program that would require all my time and energy for the next year. The silence that followed was deafening. My mother's face went pale, Marcus looked genuinely confused, and Amanda actually laughed like I'd told a joke. If you've ever stood up for yourself and been met with shock or anger instead of support, make sure you're subscribed to this channel and hit that like button, because what happened next will show you exactly how families react when you stop playing your assigned role. Has your family ever tried to sabotage your success because it threatened their comfort? Drop your story in the comments, because I know I'm not the only one who's lived through this. My father was the first to speak, and his words cut deeper than I'd expected. Charlotte, this sounds like a scam. Nobody just offers someone with your background that kind of money. And besides, what about Marcus's loan? We were counting on you to help him keep his business afloat. My mother chimed in immediately, her voice dripping with concern that sounded caring, but felt like manipulation. Sweetheart, are you sure you're thinking clearly? You've been so stressed lately. Maybe you should talk to Dr. Mitchell before making such a drastic decision, and what if this woman is taking advantage of you? Marcus had the audacity to look genuinely upset, saying I was being selfish and that family was supposed to support each other, completely ignoring the 15 years I'd spent supporting him while he failed at business after business. Amanda just rolled her eyes and asked who was going to watch Emma on weekends now that I'd be too important to help out, using air quotes that made my blood boil. I stood there absorbing their reactions, feeling the old familiar guilt trying to claw its way back into my chest. But something had shifted inside me during those 72 hours of silence and self-reflection. Instead of backing down or apologizing or trying to make them feel better about my success, I did something revolutionary. I held my ground. I'm not asking for permission, I said quietly but firmly, looking each of them in the eye. I'm informing you of a decision I've already made, and I'm also letting you know that things are going to be different from now on. I won't be available for last-minute favors, I won't be lending money I can't afford to lose, and I won't be putting my life on hold to manage yours. The shock on their faces was almost comical, like I'd suddenly started speaking a foreign language or grown a second head. My mother started crying, saying I'd changed and she didn't recognize me anymore, and I realized she was right. I had changed. I'd finally started becoming the person I was meant to be before they trained it out of me. Marcus got angry, actually raising his voice and calling me ungrateful after everything the family had done for me, and I almost laughed at the absurdity because what exactly had they done besides take and take and take? Amanda stormed out, saying she'd find a real babysitter who actually cared about family, and my father just sat there in disappointed silence, which somehow hurt more than the yelling. I left that house knowing I'd just burned bridges, knowing Sunday dinners would never be the same, knowing they might never forgive me for daring to want something for myself. But as I drove home with tears streaming down my face, I also felt something I hadn't felt in decades. Free, terrifyingly and beautifully free. Like a bird who'd just realized the cage door had been open all along. The week after that disastrous family meeting was the loneliest and most liberating time of my entire life. A strange combination of grief and rebirth happening simultaneously. My phone stayed eerily quiet. No texts asking for favors, no calls needing emergency help, no last-minute requests to drop everything and solve someone else's crisis. At first, the silence felt like punishment. Like they were collectively holding their breath, waiting for me to come crawling back and apologize for daring to prioritize myself. But as the days passed, I started realizing this wasn't punishment. It was freedom. The freedom to spend my evenings preparing for my new job instead of running errands for ungrateful relatives. The freedom to imagine a future that belonged to me instead of being borrowed pieces of everyone else's dreams. I started my training program at Hartwell Industries on a Monday morning, walking into that gleaming office building with my heart pounding and my hands sweating, terrified I'd be exposed as a fraud who didn't belong in this world of confident professionals and important decisions. Victoria had paired me with a mentor named David Chen, a 42-year-old operations genius who'd built 3 successful divisions from scratch and had the patience of a saint. He didn't treat me like a charity case or someone who needed hand-holding. He treated me like a diamond in the rough who just needed proper cutting and polishing to shine. We spent 12-hour days reviewing case studies, analyzing operational systems, learning project management software, and most importantly, unlearning all the toxic patterns I'd developed from years of people-pleasing. David would catch me apologizing for asking questions or minimizing my own ideas, and he'd stop the entire meeting to say, "Charlotte, you're not a burden here. You're an investment, and we expect you to take up space and demand what you need to succeed." Those words hit me like lightning every single time, because nobody had ever given me permission to take up space before, to be big and bold and unapologetically ambitious. The fear of rejection still haunted me, especially late at night when I'd wonder if my family would ever speak to me again, if I'd destroyed those relationships permanently by choosing myself, if I'd end up successful but completely alone. But here's what I learned during those intense first months of training. Being alone is not the same as being lonely, and being rejected by people who never truly valued you is not actually rejection, it's liberation. I started building a new support system, genuine friendships with colleagues who appreciated my competence instead of exploiting it, who celebrated my wins instead of resenting them, who asked about my life because they actually cared about the answer. Victoria became something between a mentor and a surrogate mother, tough when I needed pushing and compassionate when I needed support, never letting me shrink back into old patterns of self-sabotage. She told me something during one of our weekly check-ins that I'll never forget. "Charlotte, your family isn't rejecting the new you. They're grieving the loss of the old you, the version they could control and use without consequence. And their grief is not your responsibility to manage." That perspective shift changed everything, because I'd been carrying guilt about their pain. But she was right. They weren't sad that I was unhappy. They were sad that I'd stopped being convenient. So I made a conscious decision to embrace this opportunity fully, to throw myself into the work with everything I had, to prove to myself and to Victoria that her investment in me wasn't misplaced, and most importantly, to finally become the person I'd been suppressing for 38 years just to keep the peace with people who never appreciated the sacrifice. The real test of my transformation came 6 months into my new role when Victoria assigned me my first major independent project, restructuring the operations of a struggling manufacturing client that was hemorrhaging money and morale. I'd be leading a team of 4 consultants, presenting directly to the client's executive board, and my recommendations would determine whether they survived or went bankrupt. The old Charlotte would have panicked, would have found a way to pass the opportunity to someone more qualified, would have sabotaged herself before even starting because the fear of failure was safer than the risk of success. But the new Charlotte, the one who'd been slowly emerging from the chrysalis of people-pleasing and self-doubt, did something radical. I accepted the challenge and believed I could handle it. If you're in the middle of a transformation right now, fighting against years of conditioning that told you to stay small, hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. Because what I'm about to share about finding your inner strength might be exactly what you need to hear today. What's the biggest risk you've ever taken on yourself? Share in the comments, because your courage might inspire someone else to take their leap too. The project was brutal. Long hours, complex problems, resistant employees, and a client CEO who was skeptical that anyone could save his company, let alone a woman he'd never heard of 6 months ago. There were moments when the old fears came roaring back, when I'd lie awake at 3 a.m. convinced I was in over my head, that Victoria had made a mistake, that I should quit before I failed publicly, and proved my family right about me being delusional. But instead of running, I did something I'd learned in therapy with Dr. Mitchell. I talked back to those fears. I challenged them with evidence. I reminded myself of every obstacle I'd already overcome, and every person who'd underestimated me and been proven wrong. My team was incredible, trusting my leadership even when I doubted myself, implementing my strategies even when they seemed risky, and slowly, painfully, beautifully, we started seeing results. Productivity increased by 23%, waste decreased by 31%, and employee satisfaction scores jumped from 42% to 76% within 4 months. The day we presented our final report to the client's board and the CEO shook my hand with tears in his eyes, thanking me for saving his family business and the jobs of 200 employees, I felt something I'd never experienced before. Pride, genuine bone-deep pride in my own competence and worth. The inner strength I'd been searching for my entire life wasn't something I needed to find or develop. It had been there all along, buried under layers of family dysfunction and learned helplessness, waiting for permission to emerge. Every time I chose myself over comfort, every time I set a boundary despite the guilt, every time I trusted my own judgment instead of seeking external validation, I was building a foundation of self-respect that couldn't be shaken by other people's opinions or disappointments. I started noticing changes in how I carried myself. My posture straightened. My voice became stronger. My eye contact became direct instead of apologetic. Colleagues started coming to me for advice. Junior team members asked me to mentor them, and Victoria promoted me to senior director after just 10 months, a meteoric rise that would have seemed impossible a year ago. But the most profound change wasn't professional. It was the moment I looked in the mirror and recognized the woman staring back at me. The moment I realized I'd stopped performing the role of Charlotte the helper and started living as Charlotte the whole person. The fear didn't disappear completely. I still had moments of doubt, still heard my mother's voice in my head saying I'd changed for the worse, still wondered if I'd made the right choice on hard days. But the difference was that the fear no longer controlled me. It no longer dictated my decisions, and it no longer convinced me that I was worth less than everyone else. I'd found my inner strength not by becoming someone new, but by finally having the courage to be who I'd always been underneath the mask of compliance and self-sacrifice. 1 year after accepting Victoria's offer, I was living a life I couldn't have imagined even in my wildest dreams, a life that felt both surreal and more authentic than anything I'd experienced before. My annual salary had reached $127,000 with performance bonuses. I'd moved into a beautiful 2-bedroom apartment with a balcony overlooking the city. And I'd started investing in my own retirement account instead of funding other people's failed ventures. But the real transformation wasn't financial. It was emotional, psychological, the way I'd gone from feeling like a background character in my own story to being the author, director, and star of a life that actually belonged to me. I'd started taking painting classes on weekends, something I'd dreamed about since college, but never had time for because I was too busy solving everyone else's problems. If this journey is resonating with you, please subscribe to this channel and hit that like button, because watching someone transform from invisible to unstoppable might give you the courage to start your own transformation. What dream have you put on hold because you're too busy taking care of everyone else? Let me know in the comments, because it's never too late to reclaim your life. The small victories accumulated into a mountain of evidence that I was capable of so much more than I'd been taught to believe. I'd learned to negotiate without apologizing, to advocate for my needs without feeling guilty, to celebrate my wins without minimizing them to make others comfortable. My colleagues respected me, my clients trusted me, and most importantly, I respected myself for the first time in 38 years. I'd started dating again, meeting people who saw me as a complete person rather than a useful tool, and while nothing had turned serious yet, the difference was that I wasn't desperate for validation anymore. I was selective, boundaried, clear about what I deserved. Victoria had introduced me to her network of successful women who'd also rebuilt their lives after years of being underestimated, and finding that community of people who understood the journey made all the difference. We'd meet monthly for dinner, sharing war stories and strategies, celebrating each other's victories without jealousy or competition. And I realized this was what real support looked like. Not people who needed you to stay small so they could feel big, but people who cheered when you grew because your success didn't threaten theirs. The transformation showed up in unexpected ways too. I walked differently, talked differently, made eye contact differently, as if my body finally believed what my mind was learning. I'd stopped checking my phone obsessively waiting for family crisis texts, stopped having stress-related stomach problems, stopped apologizing for existing and taking up space. My therapist, Dr. Mitchell, said she'd never seen such a dramatic positive change in a patient in such a short time, and she credited my willingness to do the hard work of unlearning decades of toxic conditioning. I'd started journaling every night, documenting this journey not just for myself, but because Victoria suggested I might want to write a book someday about recovering from family codependency and building a life on your own terms. The woman I'd become was still kind, still generous, still helpful, but now those qualities came from a place of wholeness rather than emptiness, from choice rather than obligation, from strength rather than fear. I'd proven to myself that choosing me didn't make me selfish. It made me healthy, functional, capable of genuine love rather than resentful martyrdom. And as I sat on my balcony one Sunday morning, drinking expensive coffee and watching the sunrise instead of driving to my parents' house to cook breakfast I'd never get thanked for, I felt something revolutionary: contentment, the quiet joy of a life lived on my own terms, and the unshakable knowledge that I'd made the right choice even though it had cost me everything I'd known before. 14 months after that explosive family meeting, my mother called me for the first time since I'd chosen myself over their expectations, and the conversation was nothing like I'd imagined during all those sleepless nights wondering if I'd lost them forever. Her voice was small, almost fragile, when she asked if we could meet for coffee, just the two of us. No agenda or confrontation. I agreed cautiously, meeting her at a neutral location because I wasn't ready to go back to their house and risk falling into old patterns and familiar territory. She looked older than I remembered, tired in a way that had nothing to do with physical exhaustion, and she started crying before she even ordered her drink. I need to tell you something I should have said a year ago, she began, her hands shaking around her cup. I was wrong. We were all wrong. And watching you build this amazing life without us made me realize how much we took from you and how little we gave back. I sat there stunned, because I'd expected defensiveness or manipulation, not accountability and genuine remorse. My mother explained that after I'd left that family meeting, they'd all expected me to come crawling back within weeks, apologizing and returning to my role as the family helper. But when weeks turned to months and they started seeing my LinkedIn updates about promotions and projects and achievements, something shifted in her perspective. She'd been talking to her own therapist, processing the guilt of how they'd treated me, recognizing patterns from her own childhood, where she'd been the overlooked middle child too. I raised you to be what I'd been, the one who holds everything together while getting nothing in return, and I convinced myself that was love, when really it was just generational trauma I was passing down, she said through tears. My father had been diagnosed with early-stage Parkinson's disease 6 months ago, and facing his mortality made him reflect on what kind of father he'd been, what kind of legacy he was leaving. Marcus's business had finally failed completely, and without me to bail him out, he'd been forced to get a regular job and start living within his means, which had been humbling but necessary. Amanda had gone through a difficult divorce, and finally understood what it felt like to need help and not have anyone show up, which gave her perspective on how she'd treated me for years. But here's what I learned about healthy family reconnection. Forgiveness doesn't mean returning to old patterns, and reconciliation doesn't mean erasing boundaries. I listened to my mother's apology, I acknowledged her growth, and I told her the truth. I appreciate you saying this, and I'm open to rebuilding our relationship, but it's going to look different from now on. Because I'm different, and I'm not going back to who I was. We started slowly, carefully, meeting for coffee once a month, having honest conversations about feelings and needs instead of just logistics and favors. I met with each family member individually, setting clear expectations about what I could and couldn't offer, making it clear that my help would be occasional and boundaried rather than automatic and limitless. Marcus apologized stiffly, clearly uncomfortable but genuine, admitting he'd resented me for succeeding where he'd failed, but was learning to deal with his own insecurity instead of projecting it onto me. Amanda was the hardest, still defensive and resistant, but even she was starting to recognize that having an aunt who was thriving and could model healthy boundaries for her daughter Emma was valuable. My father and I had a tearful conversation where he admitted he'd always seen me as the strong one who didn't need validation, not realizing that strength without recognition breeds resentment. Our family dynamic would never be what it was, and thank God for that, because what it was had nearly destroyed me. But we were building something new, something based on mutual respect rather than one-sided sacrifice, and that was worth the painful rebuilding process. I'd proven that you can love your family without losing yourself, that you can set boundaries without being cruel, and that sometimes the greatest gift you can give people is showing them what healthy relationships actually look like, even if the lesson is uncomfortable. 2 years into my new life, I can finally articulate the most important lesson I learned from this entire journey. And it's simpler and more profound than I ever expected. You teach people how to treat you, and if you don't value yourself, nobody else will either. For 38 years, I'd been sending a clear message to my family and the world. My needs don't matter. My dreams aren't important. My pain is invisible. Use me however you want, because I'll never say no. And they believed me because I believed it first, because I'd internalized the lie that self-sacrifice without boundaries was the same as love. But Victoria saw something I couldn't see in myself. She saw potential, strength, resilience, and most importantly, she saw someone worth investing in. And that external validation gave me permission to start validating myself. If you're learning to value yourself after years of being treated as less than, please subscribe to this channel and smash that like button, because your transformation matters, and your story deserves to be celebrated too. What's one thing you're doing differently now to honor your own worth? Share it in the comments, because your courage might be the permission someone else needs to start their own journey. The courage part wasn't a one-time decision. It was 1,000 small choices every single day to choose discomfort over resentment, honesty over peacekeeping, self-respect over approval. It took courage to accept Victoria's offer, knowing my family would react badly. It took courage to set boundaries, knowing I might lose relationships I'd clung to my entire life. It took courage to believe I was capable when everyone had treated me as mediocre. It took courage to sit with the guilt without letting it control me, to feel the fear without letting it stop me, to embrace the unknown instead of hiding in familiar misery. But here's what nobody tells you about courage. It's not the absence of fear. It's the decision that something else matters more than the fear. And for me, that something was finally living authentically instead of dying slowly while pretending to be alive. Every time I chose myself, the choice got a little easier, the guilt got a little quieter, and my sense of self got a little stronger, until one day I woke up and realized I wasn't performing courage anymore. I was actually living it. The lesson of self-worth changed everything about how I move through the world now. From the jobs I accept to the relationships I maintain to the way I spend my time and energy, I learned that self-worth isn't arrogant or selfish. It's the foundation of healthy relationships, successful careers, and genuine happiness. Because you can't build anything solid on a foundation of self-neglect and people-pleasing. I learned that the people who get angry when you set boundaries are the people who benefited from you having none, and their anger is information, not instruction. I learned that you can love your family and still protect yourself from them. That distance sometimes creates healthier relationships than forced proximity. That blood doesn't entitle anyone to unlimited access to your life and resources. Most importantly, I learned that it's never too late to choose yourself, to rebuild from scratch, to become the person you were meant to be before the world taught you to shrink. I'm 40 years old now, running an entire division at Hartwell Industries, mentoring other women who are finding their voice after years of silence, living in a home I love with boundaries I enforce and dreams I'm actually pursuing. And when I look back at that broken woman sitting in a coffee shop 2 years ago, invisible and exhausted and ready to give up, I want to hug her and tell her what she couldn't believe yet. You are worth fighting for. Your life is worth living fully, and the courage to choose yourself will be the greatest gift you ever give to the world. So here's what I want you to take away from my story if nothing else sticks. You have the right to be seen, truly seen as a complete person with needs and dreams and boundaries, not just as a useful tool for other people's convenience. You have the right to be valued for who you are, not just for what you can do or provide or sacrifice for others. You have the right to choose your own happiness, even when it disappoints people who've gotten comfortable with your misery. These aren't selfish desires or unreasonable expectations. They're basic human needs that every person deserves, including you, especially you, if you've spent years being told that wanting these things makes you difficult or ungrateful. The world will try to convince you that putting yourself first is wrong, that good people sacrifice endlessly without complaint, that love means suffering in silence. But I'm here to tell you that's a lie designed to keep you manageable and controllable and useful to people who don't have your best interests at heart. Living authentically means disappointing people sometimes, and that's okay because their disappointment in your boundaries says more about their expectations than it does about your character. It means choosing discomfort now over resentment later, saying no without elaborate justifications, walking away from relationships that require you to be less than you are, just to keep the peace. It means recognizing that not all family bonds are healthy, that DNA doesn't guarantee love or respect, and that sometimes the family you choose, the friends, mentors, and colleagues who see your worth, matter more than the family you were born into. Victoria told me something that changed my perspective forever. The people who are meant to be in your life will respect your boundaries, and the people who fight your boundaries have already shown you they're not safe. That wisdom saved me from backsliding into old patterns, from letting guilt override my hard-won self-respect, from confusing love with obligation. The most revolutionary thing you can do is refuse to live a life that doesn't belong to you, refuse to carry burdens that aren't yours to bear, refuse to accept crumbs when you deserve the whole feast. Your existence has value beyond your usefulness. Your worth isn't determined by how much you sacrifice, and your dreams matter just as much as anyone else's. If my story has taught you anything, I hope it's this. It's never too late to start over. Never too late to choose yourself. Never too late to build a life that feels authentic instead of obligatory. The first step is always the hardest, saying no when you've always said yes, setting a boundary when you've always been boundaryless, believing you matter when everyone has treated you like you don't. But I promise you, on the other side of that terrifying first step is a life you can't even imagine yet. A version of yourself you've only glimpsed in quiet moments, a future where you're not just surviving but actually thriving. So take the step, make the choice, bet on yourself even when nobody else will, because you are worth it. You've always been worth it, even when the world tried to convince you otherwise. After hearing my story, I want you to ask yourself some hard questions. What would you have done in my place when Victoria offered that $250,000 opportunity? Would you have had the courage to disappoint your family to save yourself? What dreams are you putting on hold right now because you're too busy being convenient for people who don't appreciate your sacrifice? These aren't rhetorical questions. I genuinely want you to sit with them, journal about them, talk to your therapist about them, because awareness is the first step toward change. Do you believe that choosing yourself is selfish? Or have you started to understand that self-respect is actually the foundation of everything good in life? What story are you telling yourself about why you have to stay small? And is that story even true? Or is it just conditioning from people who benefit from your compliance? Here's the truth nobody wants to say out loud. You don't need permission from your family to live your own life. You don't need their approval to pursue your dreams. And you don't owe them your entire existence just because they're related to you by blood. What you do need is courage, support, and a willingness to sit with discomfort while you rebuild yourself from the ground up. If you want more stories like this, real, raw, honest accounts of people who chose themselves and rebuilt their lives, make sure to subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Drop a comment telling me what resonated most with you, what you're going to do differently after hearing my journey, and what story from your own life you're ready to start rewriting. Thank you for spending this time with me, for listening to my story without judgment, for maybe seeing parts of yourself in my struggle and my transformation. Remember, your life is happening right now, not someday when conditions are perfect or when everyone finally appreciates you. Right now, today, this moment is all you're guaranteed. Don't waste it being invisible. Don't waste it serving people who wouldn't serve you back. Don't waste it waiting for permission that's never coming. Choose yourself, set your boundaries, chase your dreams, and trust that the right people will celebrate your growth instead of resenting it. I'll see you in the next video, where we'll dive deep into how to create a success mindset and overcome self-sabotage, because you deserve to win, and I'm here to help you believe that too. Until next time, remember, you are seen, you are valued, and you are worth fighting for.